Morning, members and members of staff, and welcome to the Exmoor National Park Authority meeting of Tuesday, the 3rd of May, 2023. And 2nd of May. Well, yeah, that just goes to show what sort of week it's been this week. Yeah. My apologies. We'll rephrase that. We'll go back to the 2nd of May and have our meeting. And we'll move straight on. I've got apologies of absence. Theobald Phillip, Dominic Elson and Fran Smith. I think that's all. Item 2, declarations of interest. Lobbying of members, unaccompanied site visits. Anyone, anything to declare? No. Thank you very much. Item 3, chairperson's announcements. I have one or two actually. This will be the last meeting for Linda Blanchard, who joined us in April 2013. So I'd just like to record our thanks for all that time and contribution, Linda. It's very much appreciated in an area that's sort of quite often quite thin on the ground within the authority. And I feel sometimes you must have felt a little lonely in some of your affirmation and comments. But thank you very much. It is very much appreciated. I'm sure other members will. Yes? Yes, no, sir.
I have enjoyed very much the time, and I've really appreciated working with this board. There's some very good people on the board, and I know we've not always agreed on a lot of things, but it's been good working with you all. I would like to just make a comment about the staff here. You know, I've been here for 10 years. I've known quite a few of the staff for a lot longer than that. And I have to say, with the pressures that are on them at the minute, it's phenomenal. And we have an incredible staff. They're really well qualified, technically capable, professional, really good at what they do. And it's been a pleasure working for them. They've got an incredibly heavy workload. I know Rob has said to me previously with about a budget of a small secondary school. I did some sums. We've got about half the budget of Ilfracombe and West Somerset Academies. And we've got very few staff trying to run it with masses of work. We've got a climate crisis, a nature crisis, financial crisis, and we've got rampant inflation. So I would like to thank the staff particularly for everything they've done. You are absolutely amazing. And if you could pass it on to others, I'd be most grateful. And to the board, please look after them, because if you don't, you're going to lose them. They're very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Comments I could echo myself, actually. Also, as they're not standing at local elections, this may well be the last meeting for Eric Lay and Penny Webber. So I don't know whether either of them, treating them all the same, would like to say anything.
You're the one that's most eloquent. I can't speak for Penny. Yeah, you mentioned local elections. I've been told at home I've done my share of them, but things change, things move on. I am a little bit concerned though about who my likely replacement will be. I think I won't go into detail. I'm a little bit concerned about that. Yeah, a couple of points I would like to leave with you. I would call them two challenges, probably. One is a fairly straightforward one, small scale. The other one's much bigger. The first one is it's a localised planning issue, which the system has failed for the last 20 plus years. Stephen's looking at me, and I suspect he can guess where I'm referring to. Heasley Mill Chapel. Funnily enough, another chapel a short distance away closed at the same time, and has been a residential dwelling for over 20 years now. That's just south of Yard Down, at Crossroad Junction called Wallen Cross. But that's the difference between two different authorities and two different results. It's a crying shame that for a building like that at that stature to be lost, but that's where it's headed. Unless someone's prepared to take the bull by the horns, I think it's that unique situation that I can't tell people what to do. I can only suggest, but maybe, supposing Dean took a packed lunch one day and met the owner on site, who he's completely given up the ghost. He's waved the white flag a long time ago. You know, it should not be beyond the wit of man or ladies to come up with a scheme that is acceptable there. It's only a suggestion, but unless an unorthodox approach is taken, I can see it just crumbling. The other one's a bit more challenging. I don't think this has been mentioned since Bruce Hayward left. And again, now some can guess what I'm on about. Yes, it's the alarming... Sorry? Well, if you listen to Bruce many times, he referred to the alarming demise of the quality of Lochaber moorlands. You know, it started around 30 years ago. It coincided with it being unfashionable to any swaling. That's when it started to really cut like that. And it coincided with the environmental grants, in particular where landowners were paid substantial sums to keep livestock off of them. And that lasted for about 20 years. And that's when you had the gorse, millennia and bracken take over, lots of them. I'm looking at Sarah now. It's a long time ago she showed the aerial photographs of the moorlands in their prime. I'm talking about aerial photographs taken in the 70s or 80s. You know, I don't think it'd be a bad thing if you dusted them off and showed them again. And if anyone then still doubts what I'm on about, you know, just take a trip out the back here, upstream of the bar, across Winsford Hill, after they've seen that photography, and pull in at Coalsgate and ask, you know, what on earth has happened? It's not every common is as bad as that one, but there's an example if you want one. If you're still in doubt, just bear in mind the thought that 30 years ago, there have been 2,000 hives of quince honey sited all over the moor in discrete places. Well, you know, in a real environmental good cause, they happen to be lorried to Scotland now. You know, the one factor is that once they cross the Scottish border, they are free of the shackles of natural England and DEFRA. You'll say you're powerless to do anything about them, but you know, see the difference. That's all I would say. Is it retrievable? I don't know, but it has to be worth a go. And something I know Jeremy would be interested. Imagine those 2,000 hives. How many of the best pollinators you have you're lost from export and gone to Scotland? Just food for thought. Probably said too much. So
No, that would be unusual, Eric, for you. It's Penny,
I feel I must follow that. Just to say, I totally agree with Linda on the quality of the wonderful staff here. I have enjoyed my time, but I really think I've done as much as I can do, and I look forward to seeing you all in some other way of life. But thank you very much for putting up with me.
Thank you. And the contribution of members is really vital to the authority, actually, which helps guide our direction and keep it positive, actually. There are challenges, as Eric's highlighted, and I think it's sometimes good to remind us that they don't go away. They're still there. The speed of the appointment process for the NDC and the parish members will determine whether or not this is actually your last meeting. Generally, they get their act together, and there's a fair chance to make sure that it works right. There is also a fair chance that by the time we get to our July meeting, we should have a new member appointed by Secretary of State to replace Linda. That is by no means guaranteed. It depends whether the Secretary of State actually picks up the file and reads it in that course of time, determines something. There are further changes could occur in membership before we get to our annual meeting, of course. One of them might, of course, be me. That all depends whether I still end up here or not. That is entirely uncertain at the moment, which I must admit I will be disappointed if I don't. And then to one other bit, just to advise members that, very unfortunately for us, I fear, Gordon Bryant is leaving us as Head of Finance and Operations to join Torridge District Council. So a replacement will not be easy, I fear. He's given us quite incredible service during the time that he's been here and had significant challenges attempting to balance the books. What we have to bear in mind is actually talking to the audit team that do our audits, that the work that he's done is some of the best they have ever seen. So thank you, Gordon, for that. Thank you for what you've done for Exmoor National Park Authority in your time here, and your contributions will be missed. And one other point, because I didn't do it at the beginning, and my apologies, to welcome Lee Baker to his first meeting.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here, so thank you very much.
Right, we will look forward to your contributions.
Thank you.
We will move on to the minutes.
Chairman,
Sorry.
we just had a standards committee meeting,
Yeah.
and I know I mentioned it to you earlier. It might be useful if we had some summary by the independent person of the standards committee on what his views are on our current governance arrangements. I don't imagine it's very long.
Probably then, before we get to the minutes, I was going to pull it out under matters arising from the minutes, but it's largely immaterial, actually. Mick Rugglesford is our independent person, really. The Standards Committee, just to remind members, is an officially constituted committee, and it is recorded, and those recordings are available for anyone. So I'm sure whatever Mick has to say will only be backed up should anyone determine that they would like to listen to the minutes, to the proceedings of that meeting earlier on. It's not here, but yes, Mick, because there's a Standards Committee, please, if you'd like to present your findings now before we move to the body of the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to follow up, really, on the standards training that we had last November. You will remember that we had a long presentation from our monitoring officer with a PowerPoint that left me about 10 seconds at the end to say my bit. And so at the end of that meeting, I said, could you all please make sure that your behaviour is appropriate for members of a strategic committee, so that you're not playing on your phones, you're not eating meals if you're attending the meeting remotely and on video and so on. And at the last meeting, when you were discussing governance, there was quite a lot of evidence of that sort of behaviour going on, with people slightly inappropriately not paying as much attention as I would expect. So can I remind you again, turn your phones off when you come into the meeting. Most of you have got laptops and tablets that you've actually got your authority papers on, and I quite understand that you need to look at those, but from where the camera is here, the people at this end of the table are very much in the limelight, and so it would be better if you all refrained from doing inappropriate behaviour that you wouldn't do if you were driving a car while you're at the meeting. We also had the issue of there had been some concerns raised amongst members of staff and possibly amongst female members of the authority of showing respect to each other when people are speaking, and I was horrified that in that meeting basically you had some female members saying things and everybody else is paying no attention whatsoever, and then half an hour later a man says exactly the same thing as the woman and everybody goes, oh yes, that's very well. And you had all the presentations from your chief executive, which you've had 6 months to think about, and essentially that largely got ignored as well in your discussions. You weren't particularly talking about how you can save money, how we can avoid shutting the Pinkery Centre or firing all the rangers or cutting costs in some way, and you have a financial crisis on your hands. As far as the public is concerned, which includes me watching this, you needed to make strategic decisions at that meeting. I've picked this up before when there was a planning application for somebody to use a non-approved subject with Cedex cladding on their house, and you pushed that down the road a lot. You managed to push the suggestions for cutting your costs, and you need to cut your costs, down the road again, and I was a little disappointed as a member of the public in watching the 3-hour discussion which I sat through on social media, and virtually no decisions were made and no proper suggestions were made after you've had staff time for 6 months and we have known for a year that you needed to cut costs. You've had all the paperwork, you've had the presentations, you need to start making decisions, please, people, because as far as me and the general public are concerned, you're not quite fulfilling the role that you're here to do, which is to act as a strategic authority. I've got on with you all very well for the last 10 years. I haven't spoken out. I've said how well you are doing, and you behave courteously to each other. And please continue to behave courteously to each other, listen to each other, keep your presentations brief, and make some decisions. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mick, very much.
I will go away so that you can talk about me in my absence.
It is always very much appreciated that the reason we have Mick as an independent person is so that he can oversee the conduct of the authority in the way in which we work, and that is, we have to place some value over that. What we have to remember, and I think all of us, including myself, occasionally forget, is it is both recorded and videoed. Any member of the public can have a look and listen to the full proceedings of the meetings at any point in time and make their thoughts plain to us. I think we have to be absolutely certain that we are above reproach in all of those areas. Following that, thank you, Mick, and thank you for your time, and we will move on to item 4, the minutes. And to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meetings of the authority held on the 4th of April. Mike.
I propose that we approve the minutes.
Thank you. Jeremy.
I'll second that.
All those in favour? All those in favour of approving the minutes? 1, 2, 3. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, is that... Anyone abstain?
Chairman, I wasn't there. So I can't
So you
really
abstain, that's fair enough.
I wasn't there either. So.
Right, thanks, Christine. Right.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt. We have an IT issue.
Sorry about this. I'm being asked for a verification code. I don't know whether anyone else is having a difficulty, but I'd like that to be sorted out if possible.
Right.
I've been trying for the last 10 minutes.
Right, we will. Ellie's disappeared off to find someone. Thank you, Mike.
There we are.
There's
A solution.
In the meantime,
Sorry about that.
that's always the joys of IT. So, move on. Any matters arising from those minutes? Please note that the last bullet point under minute 138 is a repeat one and should have been deleted. So, Susan.
Yeah, thank you. It would just, I would find it helpful just to have a brief word from Sarah about plans for engagement with the parish councils and communities going forward in that discussion we had.
Thank you, Susan. Chair, we did talk at the last meeting about the need to engage with the local communities if we were going to make changes to the planning committee. I think there was a suggestion that we brought it back to the May meeting, so that would have been today. I didn't feel there was time to carry out a meaningful consultation. As you know, the papers have to be drafted 2 weeks before so that we can get them to you a week before, which would have meant a very, very rushed consultation indeed. I was also mindful that we've got elections going on at the moment, so probably not a good time to put out consultations. So what I'm minded to do is reflect on it and do some work over sort of June, July, and talk with the parishes and come back to you with some proposals in the autumn.
Susan?
Yeah, thank you. So that's really helpful. And I think, just so from my perspective, what you set out at the last meeting in terms of, you know, I think the context for this consultation information exercise is really, really important. And I think what you said to us at the last meeting about the context, you know, of the DEFRA cuts and the budget deficit and the need to secure savings and efficiencies across all our areas of work. And also I think what Dean said, which was very reassuring about being able to cope with the planning load in a bi-monthly planning cycle. So I think, you know, that context is very, very important part of to lead that consultation process, because I have a sense, which may not, well, my sense might be a bit that there's a concern out there that this is all about just an exercise which is potentially going to reduce representation of parish councillors and local authority members on a planning committee, which obviously it isn't. It's about making us work more efficiently, and it will just be the proportional representation will be the same. It will just be less people but the same numbers in terms of proportions. And as I think, you know, our corporate plan that we'll talk about this morning, there talks about, you know, this is another aspect of changing the way that we work. And I think if we can really put that context to the fore, that will really help to inform and hopefully to reassure people as we go forward.
Thank you, Susan. Mandy, wasn't it?
Thank you. Not to open the debate again, obviously, because there's just matters arising, but just a couple of points. Within the minutes, it does say that you'll engage further with members. It wasn't in the recommendation, but I hope that will happen as well. And secondly, there was the officers were asked to clarify whether a remuneration panel was in place. Have we got a response to that, please?
Sarah?
Yeah, this was also raised at the meeting, the remuneration panel, and I'm afraid I did look a bit confused when I was asked. We don't have a remuneration panel, and we don't have to have a remuneration panel. It's something that applies to local authorities, but not to national park authorities. Having said that, best practice is that we follow that process, that there is a process that should take place about every 3 years. It's not a remuneration panel as such, but we do need to go through a process. So I think we probably have to do that anyway, but I need to look into that in a bit more detail. Okay.
Can you just put yourself on?
We will go through the minutes otherwise, and any matters arising on a page-by-page basis, please raise as we go through. Page 1, 2, 3. Here's Mike Kelly.
I think it's a very good summary of the discussion regarding the conservation area designation. I think it's very well worded, and particularly with regard to the decision made regarding Simmons Bar. So I would certainly approve that particular wording. It sets it in context and the reason for the decision.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Page 4, 5, and page Mike Keller.
Sorry,
No, sorry, not Mike Ellicott.
I was just
Can you turn your mic on, please, Mike?
one of us will have to change her name, I think. I was just interested on the other day I went to the sale at Driver Farm, and I presume that the tenant has given up the tenancy there completely now, as he'll have no machinery or anything left. no stock. I wondered what progress there has been on Driver Farm and what we intend to do with it.
We have got Rob sitting there. I'm just wondering whether, I mean, yes, today, I think today is the day that it actually comes back to the authority. So we've been having a lot of discussions about the next steps. Our plan at the moment is to bring a paper to you in July. Sorry? Site visit. Yes, thank you. And of course there's a site visit on the 6th of June. So that's an opportunity, because I'm sure some people in the room will have been, but many of you will never have been to Driver Farm. And it's an exciting opportunity in many ways. It's a huge piece of land, big farmhouse, farm buildings and so on. So we do need to think this one through very carefully. Did you want to say any more, Rob?
Yes, very briefly, I guess. There is a process of bringing it back in hand. So as of today, the keys will be, if there is a key, it will be handed over. And the tenant's been there, as you know, since 1969. So we actually will take possession today, which requires literally physically occupying it, in terms of making sure that the outgoing tenants' possessions and everything are gone, and it comes back to us, and we will take stock of the land and everything. And we haven't been able to do that before today, because it hasn't been in a reality, if you like. We'd like to have a site visit in June, as Sarah's mentioned, and that's pretty well the earliest opportunity we have to let you see it, and we'll give you some ideas of what we think could be done there, from disposal to retention, and those are initial thoughts. And then a paper thereafter. We have said July. We've also talked about September last week as a paper. We need to get some robust costings together if retention is an option, and we're in the process of looking at that, so that we can actually give you some sensible options and costed options for what we do there. It's quite a responsibility. It is a huge responsibility for us both ways. Disposal brings all kinds of uncertainties. So that's a process in itself. Retention, if you can cast your mind back to last autumn, Andrew presented some options of retention, whether we retain everything, just some land, a small piece of land, most of the land. So we've got a whole series of things to work through with you, I think. I would say in terms of an asset, it's probably the biggest decision this authority has made certainly in the time I've been in here. So it's a huge responsibility either way. It is an iconic piece of Exmoor. It's very high, it's very sensitive, it's got designations all over it, which you think would protect it, but from a landscape point of view, we know changes can happen. So I think it's a huge responsibility for us all, actually, to make the right decision here. So we don't want to push it down the road, but we don't want to rush to the wrong decision. But we will bring you in. Now is the first time we are able to bring people in, literally to take you there and see it. So if you are able to come in June, I think that would be a very, very good thing to do. Even just a bit of a taster, because it is a particular place, as I'm sure Mike will agree. It's an extraordinary place on Exmoor.
Thank you, Rob.
Yes, I very much agree with everything you've said. The only thing, it's a great liability as it stands at the moment, because it's virtually derelict. I didn't get a chance to go into the house, but the buildings, it's a shame to see a beautiful place like that allowed to go to rack and ruin. There are no fences to speak of anywhere on the farm, no gates in a lot of situations. It's been let go. It's as I said, very sad to see the property as it is. But having said that, there is a matter of some urgency that if we were thinking of letting the grass keep, it would be a good thing to do something about it sooner rather than later. And I'd hate to see that decision just left for till September, October, which would mean that the whole of this grazing season is gone. Nobody's going to want to take it on September, October, November side of thing from the grazing point of view. And I think it's an asset that we must look at very closely.
Thank you, Mike. I don't want this to develop into a debate under matters arising, if you don't mind. A comment from Jeremy, and I hope it comes under the matters arising as well.
Thank you, Chairman.
Please.
Exactly on that issue. Do we have a strategy for securing the asset? It's broad, but securing the asset includes what Mike's been talking about. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sure Rob will.
Yes, we do. There are locksmiths out there today, and we will quietly secure the asset. We're not going to make a ring song and dance of it, because people will be looking at the farm. But yes, we have locksmiths out there today, and facilities and land agency team are all over it this week.
Thank you.
As you'd expect.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask one thing? Thanks for the great presentation. Just one thing on Driver Farm. You mentioned it's been in the family since 1969, I think you said, Rob. Is it, for my own sort of understanding, was it on an AHA tenancy or an FBT tenancy? Thank you.
It's on an AHA tenancy that Somerset County Council arranged in the late 1960s when they acquired it.
It's come all over the generation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. I think what it highlights here is the importance of that developing estate strategy that was brought to the last meeting, and how that further develops to ensure that our asset base is used appropriately and suitable for national park purposes. And I think that's the one thing to bear in mind as well. It has to generate and to work for national park purposes, which are somewhat different than and need to be applied in many other circumstances. We will move on, and we'll move on to public speaking. I don't think I have any public speakers being registered for any item as far as I can see at the moment. So I'll move on to item 6, the corporate plan. Sarah will introduce, and I think Claire will then carry on from there. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper brings you our 3-year strategic plan for the organisation and the annual corporate plan, which we're asking you to approve. So, as you know, we have a plan, a corporate plan. We sometimes call it a business plan, which sets out our key priorities and actions for each financial year. But we felt this year it was time, I think particularly as we're coming towards the end of current partnership plan and moving into the next phase, all the discussions that we've had around Glover and so on, to give you, to give the public, to give our staff team some clarity about sense of direction over the next 3 years. Leadership team, staff and members, you remember at the workshop, have been thinking about our strategic priorities for the next 3 years. And they're set out for you at 2.2 and then in the appendix. And briefly, the clear response to the nature and climate crisis, a welcoming place for all, improving people's health and well-being, a cared for landscape and heritage, a highly performing estate delivering park purposes, and a great place to work. And these are really couched in response to our overriding purposes, or statutory purposes, to Glover and to the sort of wider policy that is going on in central government. So just a little bit more detail on those. So the first one around climate and nature. The first thing we think the most important thing is making sure that the land that we hold for the nation is a place where nature can thrive, that it's beautiful and it's probably wilder in character than it is now. And that means looking across the landscape at where we can increase bogs, mires, woodlands, scrub, places that are good for nature. We also want to support regenerative farming, so the sort of farming that grows sustainable food but supports the local environment, nature and cultural heritage. And the same in tourism, so that cyclical tourism that brings people here, that they enjoy what's beautiful about the place, but we try and minimise carbon impact and their impact on the environment. So we'll be working through our climate emergency plan and ensuring that we are trying to ensure we're net zero by 2040 right across the national park. So that's our first one around nature and climate of our strategic 3-year plan. We want a renewed focus on health and well-being. So, as you know, we had a big discussion about the Rights of Way network and the importance of that. So one of the key planks of that strategy is maintaining the Rights of Way network. But it's also about removing barriers that stop underrepresented people from enjoying the park. And there's all sorts of things that we'll be doing to support that objective. And continue to provide that warm Exmoor welcome to inspire people to enjoy the landscape. The third one is really, it's almost back to our first purpose in natural beauty and cultural heritage. So again, it's about working with our farmers and landowners and land managers and foresters to look at new ways that they can continue to work with us to deliver national park purposes. And some sort of blue sky thinking in a way, I suppose, thinking about what the future of this landscape is, what could it be in the future. We know it's going to change, but what is that future landscape going to be? Working through the planning team and so on, and making sure that future development is sustainable, well designed, and that our existing buildings on our historic sites are well looked after, and that people understand those places and that we tell their stories. So fourth theme, nearly there, is about our estate. And we talked last month, didn't we, about the estate strategy, which is the big picture setting out where we're going with our estate. It's unusually large. 7% of the national park is owned by this authority, so we have a big responsibility to looking after it, and it's a huge and varied estate, as you know. So it's a bit of a reprioritisation of focusing on our estate and how we manage our land and our buildings. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it's about making sure that this is a good place to work, that we've got a motivated staff team, that we work in a very integrated way, that we are a little more commercially focused, and we're efficient. And that's about working in partnership, reviewing and checking in that we're doing everything we can as well as we can. So I'm going to pass over to Claire, who's going to work through a little bit more of the detail of what we'll be doing over the next 12 months. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. Yep. So the Appendix 2 in your papers is basically an update of the actions for this year coming. Well, we've just started. So we've sort of been mindful of that overall corporate strategy and the priorities in there, but also that we're developing a new partnership plan, and as you know, we sort of follow the framework of the partnership plan in our corporate plan as well. That guides the work that we do as an organisation. And these actions are going to be what will form the basis of the work programmes for us as an authority and for our staff for this year. So a lot of the actions are rolled forward. They are ones that are ongoing, and we've updated them as appropriate. There are a few new actions as well, which I've highlighted. And actually, I think I noticed there was one or two that I've kind of missed off as well. So we're in terms of the fact that they're a new action, so we will just make that correction when we finalise it. But I won't go through it in a lot of detail because most of you are fairly familiar with it. But I just run through, picking out a few points to highlight. We have sort of identified what we consider to be our priority actions again for this year. So that we really want to be focusing on delivering. The first one being around our outreach and education work. For this in particular, what we're looking to do is to try and make sure we can reach out to people from a range of backgrounds and providing more opportunities for people to engage with Exmoor special qualities. We're also trying to highlight this time some specific targets. We do have our performance indicators and targets, and I just thought it's helpful to kind of flag up through the actions where those are relevant as well. And the second item is about a sort of a specific piece of work that the team want to do to look at the charging structure for Pinkery residential, just to help us achieve that, because as you know, we look to Pinkery to sort of be as self-funding as possible, but that does mean if we're wanting to engage and reach out to other audiences, that we might need to put some more support into doing that. So that's what the team will be looking at this year, and they will be coming back to discuss on that. Flagged up a new action. Sorry, do you want to take action as we go through? Yep.
Just very quickly, as you talked about Pinkery, I'm aware that the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme is still carrying on after years and years. Still very popular with young people. I'm sorry, I don't know whether or not we use Pinkery for training purposes with Duke of Edinburgh's, and if we don't, could we? Just as an opportunity, 'cause it's a lovely area for walks and training, I would have thought, so just out of interest. Thank you.
I don't know specifically about Pinkery, but I know the staff team do a lot of support for groups who are doing Duke of Edinburgh's, and I think it's the same basis that if there's a interest in groups to use Pinkery as a basis for those expeditions, then it's there to be booked as would be for anyone else. So yes, it's obviously a really good opportunity to get people out and enjoying and exploring Exmoor. Thank you.
Thank you. Several of us went to Pinkery last month, earlier this month? No, last month, to meet some of the young rangers, and it was very interesting. But it was raised with us if there was some way we could have better interaction with Pinkery as a park authority. Also, I think probably financially they were looking for more support, though understanding the financial constrictions that we do have. But I think it would be very good at this point, if this is what we're doing for the future, if we could somehow involve Pinkery and rangers far more. But obviously you're looking into this as well. But that was raised by the young rangers there.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike Kelly.
I just endorse what Eva Fine is saying. It was an interesting discussion, as it always is with the younger people. But the view came forward. I think that there was a voice there wanting to be heard, representing the younger people. So this educational outreach is very important in that particular respect, because they were very well informed. They've been so well briefed, I think, the previous 2 or 3 days, but they had a lot to say, and they were trying to find a vehicle to express those views. And what we did say is one of the messages we would bring back from the morning is that we would actually represent those views and say, look, there is, if you like, the younger element that really would like to be more involved, I guess, in governance, in the affairs of Exmoor National Park, and certainly in terms of involvement in a lot of the activities. So one of the big messages coming through, unless any of my colleagues contradict me, is that they would want to be heard. They're very interested in Exmoor and all its activities, and how can they be more involved?
Thank you, Mike. Evelyn, and then Mike.
I don't know if it's the appropriate time to mention it.
Could you turn your mic on, please, Evelyn? Thank you.
There are several targets where we're suggesting we should increase our turnover, income. Number 6, number 7, number 45. We've got to be very careful about pursuing turnover unless it increases profitability. And I would say it would be more healthy to have a target of an increase in profit, because we could spend a lot of money increasing the turnover of online shops, but then discover that the actual distribution of the products costs more than that turnover produces. So I'd be very wary about increasing income without tying it to increased profit.
Thank you, Evelyn. There is something around the sustainability of the increase of turnover, isn't there, that's really important there. Mike Ellicott.
Yes, I agree with what Mike and Fran said. It was very interesting listening to the young people. The future of Exmoor National Park. A lot of enthusiasm from people that, from the youngsters that didn't have a lot to do with Exmoor until they'd been to Pinkery. But we've got a massive job to do, in as much as we're not a housing authority, and one of the Plan Focus 5-point priorities is a great place to work. We ought to have added to that and live. The worst thing that can happen is that we lose accommodation across Exmoor, and the work that people have to do here, they have to travel, come in from outside. So we're going to contradict, number one, the climate crisis, because all these people are going to have to travel in. There's a big employee at Wedden Cross, and I think roughly 80% of the 140 odd people that work there have to travel in from outside the national park because they can't find anywhere suitable to live at a reasonable price. And it's something that came up at a panel meeting the other day, where we were talking then about places for people to live, and they're dwindling because people are coming in from outside and paying absolutely ridiculous prices for property. And as I said, we're not a housing authority, so very difficult for us to have an influence on that. But if there is anything we can do facilitating the building of affordable houses, I think we must go down that road as fast as we can. Although with the cost of building materials at the moment, it's virtually impossible to build affordable houses as such. The cost is prohibitive. So a lot of work we've got to do, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mike. Susan and Francis.
Yeah, I'm just moving on from Mike's point. I think the thing is with that target, you know, when on page 5 in the appendix, you know, a great place to work is actually, in the context of this plan, it is making the National Park Authority a great place to work. So that's a distinction. So Mike's point about Exmoor is a great place to live absolutely is a completely valid thing. But in the context of our 5 priorities, at the moment, things, you know, we're talking about the National Park Authority. We see there's 1, 2, 3, 6 bullet points there, which I think is really important in terms of the staff as an asset, which we've, you know, it's been raised this morning, and the importance of how we work, more commercially focused, more efficient, and this whole new way of working thing. So currently, a great place to work is a great place as a National Park Authority to work. It was just a point of clarity, notwithstanding Mike's point about Exmoor as a place to live, and yeah, so I just wanted to make that distinction for us, just in case we've lost it, and whether we want to put that into the top level priority, you know, the list of 5 right up the top, which I think is really great. We just need to maybe make that a great place to work. So I just want to put the NPA as a great place to work in that top priority statement, just because it causes confusion, clearly.
Thank you for that, Susan. That's really helpful. Francis.
Yep. Same subject, same sorts of things that I was going to suggest. Another slightly different attitude to it. That in all the other priorities, we are looking at what we're doing with other people, and we're talking about the park and the area. We're not talking about the authority. We're talking how performing the state, delivering national park purposes, and so on and so on. So we're not talking about the authority. We're talking about what we're achieving. So I feel that the Appendix 1 first, our priorities on the first page, a great place to work, I would go with Mike to say a great place to live and work, and that we really ought to be talking, as we are with our other priorities, about the place as much as about the authority. Now, when we go on to page 5 to the section 5, a great place to work, absolutely see that we want, for all the reasons that everybody said, the National Park Authority to be a great place to work. Yes, of course we do, and all those things are absolutely relevant and right. However, there is over the page, there's the last point which nods to working with other people whose work is has a different focus, and is more about place than about the organisation. That somehow, to me, perhaps ought to be not just the last bullet point there, but a slightly separate section to make sure that we are understanding where we're talking about our own organisation and when we're talking about the place, which we are everywhere else talking for both. And in terms of a great place to work and to live for the people here, no, we're not the Housing Authority, we're not the Economic Development Authority, but we are the Planning Authority. So it would be helpful, I think, if we had a mention there of our role in placemaking through through our planning role. So it's the same subject, but I take a different view.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. I don't know whether it would be helpful there to make sure you reference the local plan and delivery against it as well. That's just thought from my point of view, because after all, our planning role is driven by, its context is completely and entirely driven by the local plan. I have Jeremy, then Mandy, and then yeah, I know it developed into a discussion. Up to you how you want to. Do you want to finish it first, or do you want to do
I think
some...
as we've moved on, let's just carry on with discussions. You've read the paper, I'm assuming, so carry on, that's fine, and we'll pick up any comments.
That was the feeling I got, that it seemed like everyone had read it. So I've got, first of all, Jeremy, Mandy, Linda, and where are we going down here? Marcus, yeah. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Dick, great report. My goodness, a lot of people are going to be busy, aren't they, if we can deliver all of that. What I'm interested in particularly, it's all good stuff, it's all heading the right way. But just going back to what Eric Lay said to us earlier, how do we know that our main asset, the moorland, the commons, is in good heart or in the heart we need it to be? What is that? What is it in these times? Because there's been considerable effort, hasn't there, to maintain it in mechanical ways rather than grazing, all these sorts of things. So what I would like to see in here is something that brings that out, tells us what state the moorland's in, whether it can be recovered or not, or should it be, in what way. And I go back, Sarah, to a conversation we had some months ago at this meeting, when I was making the assumption that nature recovery on the moorland is not such a big issue as it is off, because it doesn't have the intensive farming pressures. But you told me that it was just as difficult and just as bad. So why is that? Because I'm puzzled. And is it to do with the quality of the moorland? I'd just like to understand better where we are with our main asset. There's lots of things in here, and we talk about lots of references to nature recovery, woodland, peatland, landscape recovery, farming protected landscapes. We don't talk about our main asset, the commons, the highland, the high ground, and what state they're in, and what we should be doing to maintain or recover it. And let's just have that itemised out.
Does Sarah want?
Okay, so the State of Park report is now online, I think, Claire, and there's a lot of information in there about the state of our moorlands. The truth is, it depends what you want.
This is why I'm not being specific.
Yeah, there's an ongoing debate, isn't there, about Molinia heather scrub, trees scrub, trees more. Now, probably everybody in this room will have a different view, and everybody out there you talk to will have a different view, from George Monbiot at one end to somebody at the other end. I think we have spent a long time trying to work out why our heather is declining, and we've got some ideas about that. We think a lot of it is to do with the way the moorland has changed in terms of the management of the moor, so less swaling, less grazing in the summer. We know that there's nitrogen deposition, which is probably favouring the Molinia. There's probably a whole load of things we don't understand about the way the climate's changing and how that's affecting vegetation. The discussion has got much, much more difficult when you bring in, should we swale or should we not swale, because of the carbon release when you swale. But if you don't swale, you get a wildfire potentially. And I think, for the first time, we're having some much more open debate about what is the future of these landscapes. Should they be more wooded, actually? Should some of those huge open areas in the middle of the forest perhaps have more trees on them, or have more, scrubby combes or whatever? So the answer is, I don't know the answer. What are we doing about it? Well, we had a very useful meeting with Natural England last week. Natural England has realised that it hasn't perhaps been as good as it could have been in monitoring the state of our SSSI. So they're doing a huge amount of work over the next 12 months, which is really good news. They're going to make sure that they look at all of our moorland SSSIs, monitor them, what state are they in, are they measuring up to what they should be, which I think will then lead to a much bigger debate about what they should be, what they could be, how can they best deliver for nature, climate and people. So interesting times, Jeremy. I'm sorry I don't have the answer.
Thank you for that, Sarah, and I'm not surprised at your answer, but I would just like to, I'd like to have an acknowledgement of that process that we can actually then keep an eye on and have a report on and have just continue to follow. Thank you.
Well, I guess what I was going to just add to Sarah is that this is very much, I think, going to be what we're doing through the partnership plan, which is an action in the corporate plan. So there's a distinction in a way between that bigger picture vision of what we want to achieve for the place, partnership plan, and this corporate plan, which is the specific actions that we're undertaking. And it is wrapped up in a lot of the other actions, for example, in relation to taking forward the nature recovery vision and the peatland work, etc., etc. So I think hopefully we should have covered it, and there will be more reporting on that.
Chairman, I'd still like to see it pulled out so we could just keep an eye on it. I mean, I know exactly what Eric means, and it is, depending on how you look at it in your view, and we want to make it more available to the public, but I'd like to know what we feel we are supposed to be making available, and what, even if the constraints are put in, so that we understand what those constraints are to delivering a variety of different aspects. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Very pertinent debate at the moment, because probably several of you might have noticed what's been happening on Dartmoor around that, and the Westminster Hall debate last week around the moorland management approach being proposed and so on, of which it seems all parties seem to disagree quite comprehensively. So obviously it's not just here that we're suffering those concerns about what is the appropriate management to get what is required. So it will be an ongoing debate, undoubtedly.
Thank you.
I'll move on. Mandy.
Thank you. Just to echo a couple of previous speakers, I like live, work, flourish, actually. I think it's a lot more than just working, and hopefully if you do all three of those things, it will add to the overall health of the park. For me, it's a more strategic issue to raise, please. We've talked here in the delivering the purposes, and I've been reading with interest the partnership plan and the local plan, and I was trying to have that golden thread through from those plans and into this, and I was struggling a little bit with that, because there should be a golden thread through all that we do so they link together. And my second note was around, we have a long list, my goodness, that is a heck of a list of work to do over the next year. And I was trying to link back each item on that list to what we were trying to achieve and work out whether that list actually achieved what we were setting out to achieve. And again, I was struggling with that a little, to cross-references. I would have found it really helpful to have, this is what we're trying to achieve and these are the actions that are going to achieve it. So I think we can make sure our actions are going to achieve what we're wanting. And my second question is, will they be monitored through the year? Will there be an update report? Will we have red, amber, greens? Will we have percentages achieved? Because all of those things, really, you need to start monitoring that plan once it's in place, so that you can make sure, so you don't get to the end of the year and realise that several elements have been forgotten or couldn't be delivered. So quite a long question, but more strategic probably than a specific question.
Claire? Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So yes, I think your point about the golden thread is that normally we do include the ambitions of the partnership plan, which then the actions sit below. We didn't do that this time, just because we're in that state of flux between introducing this new 3-year corporate strategy, which has those 5 themes, and working on the new partnership plan. And also actually in talking with our delivery team, there is also a feeling that, there was a feeling that a lot of what they do crosses over
you know, several different ambitions, and sometimes it's difficult to know, well, where best to fit them. But I think that probably is something we will look to do next year when we've got the new partnership plan, because I think I agree it is a bit clearer then, other than just having a long list of actions without that sort of structure. So I guess that's just a little bit of a blip this year because we're in that transition phase. I think, yes, I mean, actually one of the things I was going to say in my introduction is that it is a lot in there. And I think to respond to quite a lot of the comments that have been made as well, you know, we are very mindful of the fact that we need resources to do all of this. Now, the plan does reflect the decision that was made around the rights of way, and you'll see that there are specific actions in there about how we manage that reduced resource that's going in, and the changes that are going to take place in the team to reflect those decisions. We have other decisions that still need to be made around capacity for other areas of work, which I would expect as they, you know, take place, they will start to be reflected in the corporate plan as well. But at the moment, you know, we have the staff and the resources that we have, and you know, therefore these were the actions that we came forward with. But you know, going back to the point around the Young Rangers, for example, you know, they are a fantastic group. There's a lot of resource and effort that goes into supporting and enabling them to, you know, to bring their views forward. We would like to do more. We would like to have, you know, more ability for them to, you know, to engage with the authority, but that requires some resources, you know, some capacity to be brought in. So I think, you know, we are sort of mindful of all of those things, and what we do, just to answer your last point, which is pertinent here in terms of the monitoring, is that I put it in section 3 of the report, is that we monitor quarterly with our delivery team. So we have a wider range of performance indicators. We use the finance and advisory finance and performance advisory panel as an informal member discussion on that, and then in 6 months' time we report back to the authority in terms of progress, where we have sort of red, green, amber, you know, reflection on how we're doing, and then annually we do a full annual report. So in July at the AGM we will have a full report on the last year. So there will be regular monitoring and reporting back on all of that. Hopefully that answers all.
Thank you. I was just concerned that, one, we had the resource, and two, there was the finance as well, because I know the pressures attached to the authority, and again, for me, that probably wasn't clear when I sort of read through it all, but I'm sure that's work that's going on behind the scenes, so thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Linda.
Thank you. I've got a few points. One of mine was going to be resources, bearing in mind my earlier comment about what a great staff we have. I'm sure Sarah and Claire have been through it, and what we need to do, we hopefully have got the resources to do, but we are going to be in a little bit of a hiatus, losing Gordon. Obviously that's going to take a little bit of hit to the authority. But I wanted to remind you that every time we add something in, I hope Sarah is mentally taking something out, because we don't have the resources to keep increasing indefinitely. On the 5 priorities, I think after the meeting last month on the governance review, I think it's perhaps something that could be discussed within any future debates on governance review, but looking at those 5 priorities, I could, round the table at the moment, obviously we're going to change, I could see 5 lead members here with the right skills and experience to take a championing role, and maybe that's something that could be discussed as part of the governance review. I think it would be a very welcome thing for those people out there, really, to be able to see who's the member they can come and talk to on the priorities. And linked a little bit back to the partnership plan on the priority 2, the welcoming place for all, health and well-being, and some of the debate has linked sort of education outreach to that. I currently am on the partnership group for education and outreach, and it's fading away. It's losing its reason for being, I think. I think Ben's probably struggling, so maybe as part of the partnership review we could give that group a wider remit and perhaps link it more closely to that more general comment.
Thank you, Linda. Marcus.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It was actually, I think, my first point was on that great place to work, etc. And I took it. Oh, that's right. Yeah, my first point was on the great place to work, etc. And there was one point in there also. It said the being more commercially focused, and it's a case of we're a national park, not business. So I suppose whether commercially focused is one thing, but as long as we remember that we're here to perform national parks purposes and not to run a business. So it's making sure that doesn't get lost, because there's some authorities where people would like us to be a business and not a local authority, and we're not a business. But on that point, and this is probably turning into a soapbox for me, is how we measure it being a great place to work. Do we measure it being how many vacancies we got? But actually, if we haven't got that bigger amount of staff, how do you tell that? You could have the happiest place in the world to work, but then you might not be able to actually pay the remunerations that's required, so you could have more vacancies. So it's how you measure that, and it's making sure, and how we as members measure this. There's no criticism on the authority and or chief executive, I suppose, but how do we know that is a happy place and nice place to work? And how, because to be honest, as a member, I don't have that many one-on-one conversations, or deep, meaningful conversations with officers, where maybe I do with another organisation or have in the past, where you can meet them and you can have actually chat and a cup of tea with them. And it's how other members, whether other members are doing that, whether the chair's doing that, and how we gauge that. So that's on that one, I suppose. The second point, I suppose, was going back to, and I'm not thinking so strategic, I'm being a bit more on the what number was it? 40, I think. That's it. Through the MPA's planning role, working partnerships to support delivery of local needed affordable housing and produce guidance. On that one is, we aren't the housing authority, we know that, but what we do have is a lot of land. And I don't know whether we could beef that up so it's not just through the planning role, and how we do that, because one thing we haven't done I noticed during this we've got targets and things. We haven't really mentioned individual organisations. So there's things like Exmoor Young Voices. Do we actually need to name them as maybe trying to work with them a little bit more, how we can do that? But again, it's what we can do with regard to affordable housing, because I know it was mentioned that the cost of building is high at the moment, but actually when it comes to affordable housing and housing providers, it can, before you know it, they've done it in a 50-year payback time, and actually is affordable because they'll just do the break even over however many years it is. The issue we have with affordable housing isn't necessarily the building it, isn't the filling it. The problem we have is there isn't any land, because by the time the developers do their, what do they do again? Their needs, not the need. Well, first of all, we have needs assessments, which is very odd, how they work out. Ask everybody in a village who lives there, do you need a house? And they all say no. Ask people, would you go and live in that village? They might say yes. So that's something that I think we could address with the local authority or the housing authority, how we deal with those needs assessments. But it's also those viability assessments that the developers do, that sometimes they've just talked themselves out of any affordable housing anyway. Now, that's not the case necessarily in the park. But there is maybe a role the park can play that is a little bit more than just the planning role. And obviously we're tied with, as you said, Chair, with the local plan. And obviously we voted not to review that local plan because we see it as a live not a live document, but other people put that in a different way. But we can work with the local plan. But we are, in some respects, got to work with it. So it's how we deal with that. And wonder whether that could just be. Well, I don't think it should be. I just think it could be added in something into it. Taxi for someone, and I think that's really how we deal with that, because I think that's probably, if we all talk about it, we talk about it an awful lot, wherever you go we talk about it. There's even non-social housing isn't affordable. I think, as Francis says many times, I mean I couldn't afford to buy a house in the park anymore, I don't think. not sure, maybe in a couple of villages, but yeah, it is really out the remit of an awful lot of people now, and it's only going to get worse unless we deal with it. And yeah, we start dealing with it now, we probably won't see the fruits of it for 20 years. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Hey, Marcus. Claire?
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond. I mean, I think, yes, all very good, well-made points, thank you. I think the commercially focused bit is really because that's where we've been, yes, you're absolutely right, only in order to deliver our statutory purposes, but that's where we're being pushed, particularly by government, in terms of finding more income, you know, finding more ways of funding some of the work that we do. So I think that's the intention there. How we measure whether we're a great place for work, good question. So every year when we do the annual report, Ellie does a full report on our kind of staffing, our turnover, etc. So I'm sure that, you know, between us we can come up with. Do you want to say something, Ellie? And yeah, we can come up with some suggestions around that. But it is reported annually to members, so you do get all of that information.
Yeah, we've got quite a few mechanisms in place in terms of monitoring staff. So I monitor sickness absence quarterly. So and we're such a small organisation that, you know, I often get the forms back in, so I'm often getting feedback straight away. We have regular appraisals, and you know, we get to review those documents. We can pick up on any issues there as well. We hold exit interview data as well from staff that are leaving, and then, of course, regarding the organisational development work, we've done a staff survey, we've done workshops for staff to get their thoughts and ideas about how they feel that they want how they want the organisation to be as an employer. So there's lots of work going into that as well. So thank you. I think that's everything. Yeah.
On this point, thank you, Chairman. So if you will recall that when we had this last autumn, it was suggested by the membership that I went and spoke with Ellie to make sure one member had a close eye on it, and I can confirm that all this goes on, and Ellie and I have met, and I'm very impressed with the support that goes to the staff. And while I've got the floor, I just think we need to refocus here. We're sort of straying into every other area you could possibly imagine that affects the lives of the people living, working, and visiting Exmoor. Can we just remember, it's Exmoor National Park authorities actually we're talking about, not everybody else's.
Thank you, Andrea. We can move on at that point, unless you've got anything to add, Sarah? No? Jeremy was next, and then Eric. Claire, do you finish?
Right. Thank you. We've said an awful lot. I put my hand up a little while ago when we were discussing about the moorlands and the health of it. And I'd just like to repeat something I said at a previous meeting, is that with my Brendan Common hat on, we were the beneficiaries of a FIPL grant, which allowed the late and great Robert Dean to do a report for us, stock take and assessment of future management needs and opportunities, but also looking back at 20 years of management of a common. I offered then to circulate that. I re-offer it on behalf of the Brendan Commons Council. It is a very good document looking at where we are and how we could go. And if it saves us some time and generates the debate, then I think it would be a very good resource to offer to put on the table again. If I could just go on a couple of points. We mentioned about running shops and that sort of thing. I note that the National Trust locally have closed all their shops, and there must be a reason for that. And another point on the National Trust is that the NCAP group are going to look at what the National Trust are doing over at our end at Tattiscombe on the 9th of May. And again, looking at partnership plans, you know, they are
doing, or appear to be doing enormously great things for nature recovery and all that sort of thing. So it is great that NCAP are going to meet them and will be able to come back and use that experience and help the national park. Thank you.
Thank you. John, take Eric's and then try and answer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, listening, it's quite interesting. Dare I say, more interesting than the debate at the last meeting, which our friend from High Bickerton referred to, but that's another story completely. I find it's quite, picking up on 2 points, Mike Ellicott, it's not the first time he's mentioned about, you know, almost the impossibility of housing for young people nowadays. He may or may not know, for the first time in 7 years, a little bit of good news, building materials are actually falling. They've got a long, long way to go, but I was always told what goes up must come down, so we live in hope on that one. But I think a real issue alongside it is, for people, young voices, raise the issue time and time again, but it's this situation of unavailability, plots in the right places literally are not available. They're family owned. Yes, potentially they would come for a member of the family, but across the board they're not available. So if you haven't got a plot of land, you can't build a house. But I know that's very simplistic, but I think it's factual. I was interested in Sarah's answer to Jeremy's question just now. I'm not sure if she'd actually got an answer, but just on trees alone, I think history shows that trees thrive in sheltered valleys, no matter how steep they are. Establishing them on open moorland is not so easy. Conifers, for example, sooner or later, they'll collapse like a pack of cards. Anyone that can remember the gale, I think it was January 1990, there were millions of conifers went over. Like for instance, there's clusters sited on high parts of the moor currently. Warren, for example, I'll guarantee sooner or later they'll all be on the ground. When, I can't tell you. But so there's practicalities will come into that discussion further down the road, I hope. Because without being practical, my experience is you don't achieve much, but that's another story. There's all sorts of things that come up, but that's 2 I've picked out on. I'll just leave it there. Just one comment on Jeremy and Brendan's comment. Yeah, that is one moorland that is, shall we say, almost maintain the status quo. So someone needs a little bit of credit for that. And probably lessons could be learned from it.
Thank you, Eric. Right, Claire.
Thank you. Just to pick up on a few of those points. Jeremy, I think if the office there, if you could send a copy to Judy and then she'll circulate it to the members. Is that the best way of doing it? Thank you very much for that. And I'm not sure if you explain what NCAP is for those who don't know. It's the Nature Conservation Advisory Panel, which is one of our partnership plan groups. So, okay, on that one. On housing, which a few people have raised, yes, of course, it does remain one of the really, significant issues for the place. I think in terms of this as our corporate plan and our role, we have highlighted that, we see that as being as part of our planning role, the work that we do, but it is very much in partnership with the Housing Authority. The fact that we have funding from on the Somerset side for a rural housing enabler is fantastic, and I think it's that partnership working that really on the ground makes things happen. So again, we have representatives around the table of the housing authorities. So hopefully, those connections can be strongly implemented in what happens on delivery. But that's why we've framed the action for us as an authority in that way. I don't think I need to say anything else. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Susan.
Just a small point, and I'm sure, Eric, that your comment at the start of what you just said was made in jest. I'm sure it was, but I just personally don't think it's really appropriate in any way to kind of undermine, whether it was in jest or not, the importance of the discussions we were having at the last meeting and comparing them as being less interesting than this. You may feel I'm being pedantic or slightly oversensitive, but it may have been in jest, but I didn't think it was in jest from my perspective, so I'm just making that comment.
Thanks, Susan. Was there any... Lee?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, going on to the, just to let the members know, the Exmoor Young Voices, I was very fortunate to have a meeting with Will Locke. Most of you know Will Locke, I'm sure, around the table from Exmoor Orkridge, in terms of leading the Exmoor Young Voices. Met with him and Dean Kinsella, I think is the planning officer here. So those of you who aren't aware, I work for a bank, and we were looking at trying to implement a credit policy to try and help the Exmoor Young Voices stimulate some property growth and some property build, if you like, on Exmoor. We're working through that now. Stephen's aware of it. So hopefully in due course we'll be able to get some positive news for Exmoor Young Voices and the Exmoor National Park in due course. Just as an update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lee. Andrea?
Chairman, it's been a really useful and long debate, and I'm reassured that we have the resources to do what's in here. So I'd like to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much. And before we move to that, just a couple of comments I will make on it. As regarding the reports there, we have Brendan Common, which has kept its annual report, and we also have the Mullen Moor project, which we support as an authority as well, which I think there is an open day there coming up in June time. As soon as I know the date, I will let you know, because some members may find it of interest to attend, and there's several years' worth of reports there, together with peer-reviewed evidence on impacts on moorland management. So it may be useful. That was one bit. The other bit around the corporate plan is a lot of comments being made around the commercial focus and so on, and a few kindly reminders that effectively we are not a business as such looking at profit. We have to present, I believe it's a balanced budget, isn't it, Gordon, annually. That is the important criteria that we get to ensure that our spend is within those the limits of our budget. I think just a reminder, and I don't know whether I should say this or not actually, but I do find it always rather ironic that we get presented the commercial fundraising challenge by our overseeing organisations who are probably some of the least commercially minded that you can possibly find. So it provides quite a challenge. I have a proposer and a seconder for four. And I go back 2 pages for the recommendations that are there. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. I thank you very much, Claire. Very much appreciated. Do members want a short break? 10 minutes? Right, members. We will resume the authority meeting with item 7, our bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Exmoor Pioneers, past, present and future, and a report from Rob Wilson North. Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. You've got a paper, I'm assuming you've read it, so I thought what might be helpful would be to do a sort of relatively quick presentation which lays the programme out for you. The last time we talked about this was last year, where we were asking for your approval to take a bid to the lottery and to commit £300,000 of the legacy funding. Do you recall the legacy funding that we were given from late Cynthia Hadley?
Rob, there will be 1 or 2 members here that haven't.
Okay.
Right now. So if you just briefly describe what the legacy funding was about.
Well, very unusually for the National Park Authority, we were the recipients of 2 legacies, and one individual, well, it doesn't matter, one individual lived in the West Midlands, and there's no clear connection with Exmoor, but her entire estate was left to us. And then the second one, a lady who lived in Bristol, we were one recipient of a range of beneficiaries of the estate. So in the case of the Cynthia Hadley legacy, that was her house, that was the proceeds of which were given to us, for the preservation and protection of the moor, in inverted commas. And when we talked to members about it at that point, I fondly recall Vivian White saying, you know, we should be thrilled by this, and collectively I think the view was we should try and maximise, we should spend the money, and we should be clear about a definable project on which the money could be spent, but that also, if possible, we should use the opportunity of that funding to increase the impact of the money by getting extra funding in to go with it. So in other words, to use it as match funding. And that is what we set about doing last year. And we put in a bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which we've been successful in getting development funding for. And we said to you last year, if that was the case, we would come back and we would lay out to you in much more detail what the development funding will do. So this morning is really a reminder of the programme and just saying to you what we'll be doing with the development funding, and then what the next steps are beyond that. So without further ado, I should just go straight into the presentation. I think the other point just to make is that the focus of the programme is the former Royal Forest of Exmoor and the commons around it. We haven't actually geographically defined it with a line on a map, but what we've done is said that's the focus area. And it's that area because it is one of our nature recovery hubs, and because we've worked in that area a lot since 2013, we feel we have a very good understanding of the problems there we will be trying to address and trying to fix. So that's why there, as opposed to anywhere else on Exmoor. We have to spend the money somewhere, and that is a focus area for us. It's a focus area because we own the bulk of our land there as well. So the image on the screen shows our land ownership in red, and the green circle is the very approximate area of the Royal Forest of Exmoor. If you want to look at it a different way, it's that sort of area geographically as well. That gives you it as a sort of percentage of Exmoor, if you like. It's what, 25–30% of Exmoor, which the funding will be focused on. Could you spread it wider? Yes, you could, and it would have less impact. Could you define it more closely? No, that's about the best focus we could fit and the best fit. What are we going to do? Very, very crude summary, just so that you've got it in your heads. It is to deliver nature recovery projects. The value of that is just over £300,000, and there's some conservation of cultural heritage. That's local heritage assets defined by the local heritage list, and national heritage assets, listed building scheduled monuments. We want to deliver a skills programme that's focused very much on the skills needed to nurture a landscape like this. Now, we haven't defined what those skills are. It could be tourism related, it could be woodland related, it could be ecology, it could be all kinds of things. And the purpose of the development funding is to nail those things down. So at this stage, it's a broad skills programme. 100% funded interns, that kind of thing, continuing young rangers, that kind of thing, yes. And one of the things that's come out very strongly with us is the difficulty. I've used the term Royal Forest very easily, and you're imagining woodland, and the Royal Forest isn't woodland, it's moorland. So it's very confusing for people, for visitors, if you like. So an interpretation of the landscape and its history is a fundamental part of this programme, so that in a sense it becomes physically and intellectually more easier for people to visit and appreciate the place. It's quite difficult and quite challenging for people currently. And in amongst this, as you would expect, a series of events and activities aimed at new audiences especially, not just new audiences, but especially at new audiences. Another way of thinking at it, I'm trying to make it very visual. I tend to be more and more visual as I get older. A big green circle is the landscape of the old Royal Forest of Exmoor. There's a whole series of circles going on around it. Events and activities, health and well-being, etc., the kinds of things, wild swimming, you name it, we'll be doing it. Nature recovery projects, heritage conservation projects, a staff team here of 3 people to deliver the programme, and we're about to recruit internally here to help us develop the programme. So we're doing a recruitment at the moment to actually help us develop the programme from our existing staff team. So particularly people who perhaps in a position where they could do with some more hours, they want to use their skills more differently. So we're trying to align this programme very, very closely to what this organisation wants to do. It's not trying to create a bubble of something new, which makes everybody run faster. It's trying to align as tightly as it can with what we currently do and what our aspirations are. We want to tell the stories of the remarkable lives that people lived on the Royal Forest over a long, long time. And in amongst this, there's a skills programme with skills fairs, young rangers, interns, volunteering. I'm going to keep going. Why have we called it Pioneers? I'm not very good at titles, is the honest answer. And it came very late in the day. But it is a pioneering landscape in lots of ways. One of the earliest places in the country where copper was exploited over 4,000 years ago. People came from all over the country to live and to work on the Royal Forest 200 years ago when it was enclosed from being a Royal Forest and fell into private hands. And we know that story well, but we don't tell it very well. Those ordinary lives of people. We're looking at woodland creation, and some people have a historical mindset. Mine's an archaeological one. If you go back 4,000 years to a climate that's very similar to the one we're going into, Exmoor was wooded. The high combes were wooded, and we have evidence in the last few months of extensive woodland. Top of Alderman's Barrow, 1,400 feet above sea level, growing trees to maturity. So we have a historical perspective. In fact, we have a generational perspective, all of us, don't we, inevitably? But if you actually stretch back a bit, the climate that we're going to go into in the next 20, 50 years is not dissimilar to the Bronze Age, when this place was wooded. Pioneers are young rangers. These are the people who are going to take us forward. And we've already touched on this. We need their environmental credentials, and so that they're pioneers as well, as are the new audiences who don't know this place yet and struggle to engage with it, even if they have come across it. The problems we're trying to fix are a decline in nature. We have designated it as a nature recovery hub in the nature recovery vision that you adopted. We know heritage is in poor condition, particularly local heritage. That is not nationally designated. We know we're short of skills to nurture this landscape. A very good example is countrywide, if you like. We have massive targets for tree planting. We have a national tree shortage in this country. We don't have the people who can grow trees from seed. And yet the government has these very, very challenging targets to get trees in the ground. So we know we have a shortage of skills in the countryside, traditional skills and others. It's very challenging if you're not familiar with it. I remember first coming to Simmons Bath 30 years ago and thinking, what kind of place is this? And now I sort of know a bit more than that, I think, and still find it quite challenging. It's a fragile local economy, and it has a lack of clear identity as a place, what is this place, is that question, if you like. But an extraordinary heritage, a very rich heritage, a unique heritage. So we're proposing a solution that is projects that will restore nature, conservation of heritage, really reaching out to new audiences, and we'll be doing that this year through the development funding. We're looking at very different kinds of interpretation to what national parks have done traditionally. We tend to put up interpretation boards as a fixation almost, I think, sometimes. We don't want to do that at all in this landscape. It's too important and it's too special. And there are all kinds of other ways you can interpret the past, the present and the future in a place like this. And that's important. That's why it's Exmoor Pioneers, past, present and future. And then the sort of things we're so good at, which is short walks and that sort of thing. The thing that opens the place up to people. And we want to do, it's very sort of current to co-create, but we'll be doing co-creation. So a range of activities to allow people to get involved in some of the capital projects we want to do around nature conservation and heritage as well. I think in some ways I know that the lottery feedback to us was that what they liked most about the programme was the skills element, and that I was slightly surprised at, but welcome that. So we want to work with local businesses. We are working with local businesses there, but we want to work with local businesses to see what kind of skills programme we come up with. We're not going in with a fixed idea about how to do it, So we want to get their views, and so we've already begun that process, really. And it will be around internships, it might be apprenticeships, it will certainly be around volunteering. It's not age-related, it might be people looking for a career change, it might be people starting off. So we'll be going from 16-year-olds on up. Why does it make sense now? Well, as I alluded to earlier, I think we do understand something of the problems that we're trying to fix. It gives us crucial capacity to do it. We've already talked about resources and capacity here and the challenge of that. It gives us additionality to help deliver this. We really do know the place over the last 10 years. We've done a lot of research, and we know some of the things we're trying to sort out. And the legacy funding, going back to that debate that we had, that really helpful conversation we had with you, that legacy funding is a real opportunity to lever in more money. And it's the best thing we can do for that legacy, I think. We have strong partners to work with. And we think that if you look at the programme as a whole, it aligns with what DEFRA wants to see from protected landscapes. That's not the only reason we're doing it, it's not the main reason we're doing it, but we think it absolutely aligns with what DEFRA wants to see protected landscapes do. I'm not going to talk too much about the detail. We have a lot of land ownership. We've done a lot of thinking, this map shows, we've done a lot of thinking already about the opportunities. So we're not beginning from scratch now. But if you focus on things like the area around Simmonsbath, the Upper Barle, we are looking at woodland creation plans, and we will be planting trees there. We've got the first of those, which was unimaginatively described as Birchcleave Extension, because Birchcleave is a woodland, and we were going to put more woodland next to it. The Birchcleave Extension is now known as Kingswood, which is a much better name, and it's the first foray into that landscape of new trees in the Coombs. We think we've got huge potential here. There could be 150 hectares, possibly double that. And this is woodland just feathered into the Coombs. And we talk about moorlands on Exmoor, but a lot of our moorlands have woodland to some degree on, in one way or the other. And this is an example of some of the visualisations we've done. I don't know what you think of when you talk about woodland creation, but this is Great Wilcombe, not far, well, Flexborough in the foreground, so just south, down the Barle from Simmonsbath a little way. And the top image is how it looks now, and the bottom image is how it will look in 50 years' time with 25 hectares of woodland. It's not very different, is it? So let's get away from some of the images we have of afforestation of the chains and things like that, which are a bad idea. This is very, very different sort of concept. But nevertheless, they're trees that sequestrate carbon, they're trees that alleviate flooding downstream, they're trees that are very good for the environment. It's a great addition to the landscape. So what the funding gives us, and I'll touch on the funding at the very end, is basically a development. The funding gives us the chance for a development phase, which allows us to define the detail around the things we've said we want to do. So the lottery like what we want to do. I'll come back to that at the end. But this development phase allows us to nail it down. So what we will be doing this year, and the development phase runs to March 2024, we will basically bring a partnership together, a very small partnership of organisations, groups that are very, very keen to see this programme happen. We're in the process of recruiting a programme coordinator who I hope will start within the next couple of weeks. And then we will nail down the interventions we want to make, and that's for capital projects in particular. So where we want to do nature recovery projects. We've got to define it in detail to go back to the lottery at the end of the development phase. So it will be around moorland reversion, in other words, land that is on the edge of moorland that we might want to see go back to moorland. It will be around natural flood management, grassland management, meadow management, species reintroduction, for example, marsh rotillery. It will be surveys of local wildlife sites, of triple SIs and other key target areas. So the kind of things, the sort of preparatory work you'd expect to see. Ditto for heritage, so looking at at-risk sites and local heritage list sites that are at risk. We'll work to define new audiences. That's the groups that currently don't visit but possibly would. And we have a good sense of those from our audience development plan work that was done a couple of years ago. So we'll be doing that work this year through consultants, and basically how we engage and how we work better with those new audiences. We will also look at something around public realm identity and consistent design, particularly in Simmons Bath, which sort of it has almost a sort of slight contradictory character, sort of different fencing, different styles of different things going on in the public realm. So we'll be looking at that and seeing if we can come up with a solution to some of those issues. And remember, we have a number of assets of our own in Simmons Bath, so we do have a vested interest directly in this. And we will put together a programme of activities that we will run at the end of the summer and into the autumn to see how they go, in a sense. These are engagement activities, the kind of things you'd expect national parks to be doing in terms of events and activities, but perhaps pushing the envelope a bit to see what appeals to people. And of course, we're not starting from scratch here, as I said earlier. And we'll carry out visitor surveys as we normally do, but we'll collate the feedback from those and the activities we do. So that's a busy year for us. A lot of it is consultants, but we will have a programme coordinator to drive it. Just to give you a sort of insight into how these things might fit together, because it is a programme that works together. One of the concepts we're playing with at the moment is one of Pioneer Hubs. So examples for that might be White Rock Cottage, Exford Tree Nursery. You remember the tree nursery we created at Exford, Simmons Bath Sawmill or Pinkery. And if you took the tree nursery in Exford as an example of how this programme works, very simple, and I'm not great on diagrams. So we have lottery investment, which will pay for some enhancement of the nursery infrastructure there. It will pay for a skills programme that might involve interns working there and volunteers as well. So there's money going in, which allows us to do things. There's to and fro with the volunteer programme. So we'll have volunteers who will be working there, but also will be working out on tree planting projects. We'll have interns working at the nursery, and we'll be doing community events and family events as we started last year, seed to sawmill, that sort of thing. And as a result of that, we'll be producing young trees, not in the very short term, we know that, we weren't born yesterday on this, but we will be producing trees for the estate to drive the new temperate rainforest that we're talking about around Simmons Bath. So that gives you an example of how a hub might work, how everything hangs together, if you like. And we'll be working these up through this year as we work on the development phase. So the sum of money at the end, how it works in terms of finance and the phases, if you like, we are just now embarking the development phase, and we've had 60,700 from the lottery, and we matched it with 10% of our own, and that's pretty standard for the lottery. When we get to the end of the development phase, which will be at the end of March 2024, we will resubmit the bid. So the bid that we've sent into them, we will resubmit, but with much, much more detail in it as a result of the development phase. So the development phase will inform the resubmission of the bid. And then that, if all goes well, and it should do at this point because they like the project, at that point we will embark on a 5-year delivery phase. And that is where the legacy money will be committed at that point. So that will be 300,000 from the legacy. We'll draw in, as it currently stands, 1.1 million from the lottery. And there's another 65,000 from other funders, which we have already secured. But I'm not publicising it today because we may want to move some of that money around. We're not sure about that. So we've got a little bit of work ourselves to do in the delivery phase on that. But the funding is secured. And that is it in a nutshell. I just wanted to end up by saying that the feedback we had from the National Lottery Heritage Fund was that the committee liked this. And one of the reasons they liked it most was it was an integrated programme, but that our ambition was, we had ambition, we had aspiration, but it was very relative to the organisation this is. And I don't think it's unfair to say, they said they have examples of where people have lots of ambition like we brought, but they're starting, the gap between their ambition and the reality of where they are was vast. And they said the committee had a lot of confidence in our ability to deliver this. So I think that was great credit to take back to everybody actually, and to this organisation as a whole. So we feel heartened, and now we have the hard work to do.
Thank you, Rob. Members. Linda, Fran, Francis. Please.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations to Rob and the team in getting this far with funding. That's really good news. I think Simmons Bath, as the core of this, really needs it. The conversation last month around the conservation area and the lack of understanding or the lack of perception that there is a proper identity to that settlement was quite strong in the public comments, and the lack of understanding of whatever you may feel about the Knights and their income, the contribution to the landscape has been immense in one way or another, not always as good as we might have wanted, but it's been very important, so it's absolutely vital that we get that message across to locals as well as to visitors, and working on the public realm will hopefully improve the perception of Simmons Bath as a real place rather than the connection of houses and farms. So it's really good that this project is doing this holistic approach, the climate, nature recovery and heritage, because it has been my concern with the national level, the priority and the funding going into climate and nature is losing heritage as a very poor relation, and for Exmoor it's quite important for both. A couple of questions. The recruiting, you said you're recruiting internally. Would that be a secondment rather than a new post that they would then lose their permanent job if that came to an end? And when we talk about trial pathways to new audiences, I know the budget isn't massive, but would there be likely to be any budget for those who are less physically able? I know we have got that track down to Wheeler Liza, which is not as good as it was a few years ago, but there are one or two places that, maybe even around Pinker itself, we could just forge a little bit more of a pathway for those wheelchair users or less able people into the countryside. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Shall I run through 2 or 3 questions, answer? Otherwise, I think we'll probably run out of time, I suspect. Fran.
Thank you. I think this is so exciting, and I'm really glad that we supported this and have this opportunity with this legacy, because I think it's absolutely brilliant for Exmoor, and I like the idea of having pioneers and linking it with the different with the trees growing, the sawmills, etc., the nursery. So I think that's really good. I just wanted a little bit more information on the audio and visual rather than boards. How do you expect that to work? And do you need phone internet access to be able to have that? Is it something you download beforehand? And if you do, is there good internet access where we're hoping to put this? I know that's a bit finer detail, but it was just quite important, I think, if we're moving away from big boards, etc.
Thanks, Fran. I'll take one more person, and then I'll let Rob answer the 3. Francis.
I absolutely echo everything everybody said. It's fantastic. It's really, really good. And yes, echo the point about secondment, etc., etc. If Dominic were here, I think he'd be talking about skills for woodland. He's been talking about this ever since we started, the question of the quantity of trees that is the national ambition, the level of skills and so on and so forth. Now, in our project we have the right balance, absolutely. But I just wonder if away from here there is another discussion to be had about the kind of educational establishments that there are and the spaces that there are in our area available for education, etc., etc. Whether there could be thought of a much bigger kind of a project that could not be led by us, but we might inform. And I would very much welcome any possibility of thinking about that.
Thanks, Rob. Rob. Deal with those 3, and I'll take the next 3 then.
Right. Thank you.
Linda asked about recruitment and seconding existing staff. I can't really say too much because we're going through recruitment at the moment, but for the development phase, we need, our model, I think, is giving the opportunity from, we've got a lot, sorry, rewind and start again properly. We've got a number of staff who are part-time and very skilled, and we want to give people, those kinds of people, the opportunity to add to their existing hours and perhaps extend their skill base, but equally, from my point of view, make use of the great skills we've got. So we're not looking at secondment at all. Eddie will correct me if I'm wrong. But when and if we get as far as the delivery phase, we will have 3 members of staff recruited onto the delivery phase. So this is looking ahead, and we'll recruit those in the normal way because they'll be 5-year contracts. I think that answers that one. In terms of pathways to new audiences, in terms of physical pathways and making the access route more accessible, we've already done, as you'd imagine, for this bid, we've done quite a lot of thinking, and we had the Rights of Way team up at Pinkery, and we had a really good session looking at where the obstacles are to access and how we can improve that. So part of the development work is a consultancy, and we may actually bring that in-house and do it, spend the money internally, as it were, to look at where the Rights of Way network can be improved and added to make the landscape more accessible. Now, don't think, inappropriate trails over the top of the chains or things like that. It's adding to the network, because there are gaps that a lot of people go downstream to Wheeler Liza. There are other ways that you can go from Simmons Bath, but not currently. So we are looking at that. Yeah. In terms of audio-visual, I have some harebrained ideas around the things we could do out there. I think I start with that it's a remote landscape. It's just so inappropriate to do the conventional approach to interpretation. And last summer, while I was on holiday, I did a bit of delving into the kinds of things you can do, and there's some very good examples of audio-visual interpretation of landscapes like ours. Hadrian's Wall is a very good example where English Heritage have done a lot up there, and I've been in conversation with them. And the technology might be an issue, and that's partly what the development phase is to explore. So we'll be taking on consultants to look at that and see what you can do, what the obstacles are. This might be a great idea, Rob, but it's completely unfeasible over here. Ironically, it makes it more sustainable, this sort of interpretation, because you don't, for an organisation like ours, you don't have to go and repair an interpretation board after 5 years or when it gets knocked over, or it looks out of date very quickly. It's a much more flexible way of doing it, and we like that idea. So we'll see how it goes through the development phase. And then in terms of woodland skills, I mean, one of the questions I suppose I have of the team, if you like, is you create woodland in a landscape like this. Well, it's going to be pretty unfeasible to take out timber in a conventional way when you get to that stage in 100 years. And so the woodland, what the woodland is for, beyond biodiversity and carbon sequestration, is something I'd like to push back and say, well, okay, what are we producing here? You're talking about something much, much bigger. No?
Sorry, I wasn't at all clear. I'm thinking in terms of growth and management, not planting, growth, management, growing seedlings, and not talking about taking timber out.
Okay.
If it's not feasible to think in those terms, then I'll just shut up and go away. But I just wonder whether there is something here that could be explored.
Yes, I would hope that this shows a replicable model, because it's a challenging landscape. We've got a tree nursery, and you don't have to be a genius to know that even if we're not going to grow enough trees in our tree nursery, they won't probably be ready until the end of this programme. So we are going to have to source them from somewhere else.
So where is the teaching? Where's Petrock? Where's Bristol College? Where's all those sorts of things?
And I would say that's part of what this is for, is to join that up. And it is a challenge where we've tried to do this before. But if you remember, we've had an intern programme for years and years and years. This will fully fund it. If we want to go down that road, we might look at other models.
Thank you, Rob. I have 4 people here, so I'll run through them and get Rob to answer them. Mandy first.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think Cynthia must be very happy if she's
sat listening to this, I think, what greater legacy could you possibly have? And there's a huge responsibility to use legacy money wisely. I think this project absolutely does that, and I think what is really smart is the leveraging in on money, and I think that's a great way to absolutely get the most out of it. So an exciting project, so a couple of comments. Would love to just see a little bit of finance in this paper, because for someone else looking in, you put your little slide up there with the finance figures, would have been lovely to have that, because I was left thinking, how much was the legacy and how much of it's being used, so that would be really helpful. My second question is, really interested that there's a lack of skills countrywide in this area, and I just wonder whether moving forward there's any thought to actually expanding and perhaps making Exmoor a centre of these skills around apprenticeships, training, because I think there's a great legacy, great sequestration, great that it will help all those things, but skills as well. If we can start to be a hub of that, I think for our young people and hearing their voices and giving them what they need with the potential to be jobs and an example to others, I think that's even more exciting and something that will go on and on and on. So thank you, that's my question.
Thank you, Mandy. Susan.
Yeah, thanks, very brief. Yeah, it's really great having suffered, I won't but actually say suffered through HLS development delivery phase myself. I know, you know what a great job, an achievement it is, and it's really encouraging to hear the stuff from HLS, and particularly, such a good job of tying really tightly the aim and ambition of this project with what we already do, rather than new and shiny and all that kind of stuff, and HLF appreciating that, so that's great. It was just a comment, it's just something Sarah mentioned earlier in the meeting about this whole kind of thing about, what will the future landscape look like on Exmoor in 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years' time. And it's really interesting seeing those mock-ups, of the rewooding of the valleys and that kind of thing. And I was just, not we want to increase the amount of work in this project at all, but I'm just thinking that, through this work, can you start to, show what the landscape could look like in this part of the moor, and just as a kind of a start of a trend, but more widely across, the whole of the moor in terms of what the nature recovery might look like in the longer term, and doing it through this model of showing and working and delivering and just challenging that. So it's a really nice thing, I think, to then take more widely into the landscape and say, look, this is what, the woodland might look like over the wider moor. It's not about a massive reforestation. It will enhance in all these ways and deliver in all these ways. So I think it's, it's going to serve multiple benefits, and I think there's a wider strategic benefit too in terms of nature recovery and the nature of the landscape going forward. So, yeah.
Thanks, Susan. I think really relevant, especially right past the learning phase we went through with the nature recovery strategy. So, Eric, Andrea, and Penny, and then I'll let.
Something again quite practical. Something Rob may have thought on, or there again he may not have. But since the expansion of the commercial shoots, pretty much everywhere, this is the area, roughly, that the herd of red deer now call home. And it's still, I believe, roughly in round about 3,000, give or take. Now, from experience, that one thing they love more than anything is anything young. In this case, it can be either crops or plants. They'll travel miles to get to something young. But in this location, they won't have to travel unless you're going to drive them out first. But just curious to know how you're going to tackle that potential problem.
I'll save that one for a moment. Andrea, and then Penny.
Well, mine's the opposite to the travelling. It's about travelling because we talk about new audiences, and we've talked about, you said yourself that HLF are very keen on the skills. One of the issues we have with Simspark, unless you've got access to a private motor car, you won't get there. And I think that's a huge issue. That's the elephant in the room for me, is how are we going to achieve this, and except for those people lucky enough and able to access a private motor car. And that ties in with all our first four speakers, actually. But what I will say is, well done, being involved with the 2.2 million one in Devon to get this far is quite extraordinary, and it's exhausting. And I have the benefit of not having to talk to any other member. So they all go, oh, right, okay, and that's it. Nobody ever asks me a question. It's brilliant. But don't underestimate what they've done to get this far. It is unbelievable.
Thank you, Andrea. Penny?
Well, Andrew's just stolen my thunder. That's more or less what I was going to say. I mean, Rob Wilson-North does not disappoint, does he? He gives a clear delivery, an explanation, and this is a lot of work, and I've never done anything like this. It's exciting and inspiring, as everybody's said, and the ability to deliver this is just mind-blowing. And looking forward to seeing it. I hope I live that long. And I'm all for it. And yeah, well done, everybody.
Thank you. Right, Rob.
Right. Hang on a minute. I don't know where to begin with this. I'm going to start with Susan, I think. In terms of future landscapes, one of the things I've shown you, the tree visualisations, and that's a great piece of work, but I think it's very clunky, and it tends to present a fixed image of what the future is going to be, and of course none of us really know. So I think, going back to the audiovisual ideas, past, present and future, the idea that there are options for this landscape, and we sit here thinking we can decide what they are, is a bit of it'd be nice to burst that bubble. So we have ideas, but it might be woodland, it might not look like that, it might be different. So for me, I think, as a National Park Authority, opening the discussion, we've already touched on it with Winsford Hill, what is good, what is bad, are we happy with Molinia on the forest? You know, there are options for the future. Let's drive that debate and that discussion, rather than say this is what it's going to be like. So I feel very strongly about that. There's quite a bit on the difficulty of running a skills programme in Simonsbath. Absolutely there is. And the way we view that is that the skills needed are not Simonsbath focused, as it were. So if you run an internship programme, we'll work with partners in the surrounding landscape, because some of the skills needed to, say, grow trees, you don't have to be growing them in Simonsbath. You can grow them anywhere. So it doesn't, the programme we put together won't be physically based necessarily all in Simonsbath. So if you are coming on a 12-month internship, you might do 3 months in Simonsbath and 9 months elsewhere. You might do 12 months elsewhere. It doesn't really matter. The point is we're nurturing those skills in the locality. And that's something we're going to work through in the development phase as well. But I don't see people having to somehow get to Simonsbath in order to do it. And I think we've all seen engagement projects which require somebody to fund a minibus to bring people. And if you take away the funding for the minibus, people don't continue to come. So I think those sorts of engagement activities are inherently problematic. I think they can be great opportunities for some people, but they're not really a sustainable model in their own right. But certainly in terms of skills, I see it as that this is the focus of the programme, but we've already had conversation with partners from further afield about running, and there's a huge appetite for running internship programmes, but they don't all have to physically be based in Simonsbath. For some it might be if there's a particular business, and that's located in Simonsbath, but for others it won't be the case. So it would be an option. It would be a problem if we were going to do it that way, but I don't think we are. The deer problem, yep. I mean, there's two solutions to that one, Eric, and I don't think anybody's going to go with the second solution. So I think the first one is you have to manage the trees that you put in the ground, and you either do it with deer fencing to keep the deer out, or you do it with smaller exclosures that make those trees unappealing to the deer, so very small exclosures, or even individual trees that produce a tree source, or dead hedging. So there are ways of doing it, but it all requires husbandry. It's like anything. People in this day and age tend to plant a woodland and walk away from it if they can, and actually planting a tree is the first bit of the problem in a sense. So we're certainly not sort of blind to that particular issue. But you're absolutely right about the circumstances of the deer being focused there, and we know that very, very well. It's the way you then go about establishing woodlands is a response to that problem. So you wouldn't do it the traditional way, and I know there's certain pieces of work being done recently where thousands and thousands of willow trees have been planted, and they've all been eaten off. Not just once, but 4 times, and they've all gone now. So, and I won't say any more than that, but there are ways of doing it and ways of not doing it.
You seem very confident.
I don't think I am.
Probably because I'm talking to you, but I'm not. I don't. We will. It's a pioneering project. We'll see how it goes. We will trial methodologies as well.
Yeah, that's what
So
the
let's see
title
what
says. There are
Um,
multiple reasons for your title then, Rob, obviously.
Have I covered?
I think you've covered pretty well everything. Somehow. What we're getting towards is your lunchtime is getting shorter, members. I would like somebody willing to propose this, and Mike had got his hand up first.
Yes. all very exciting, and I look forward to watching with interest the development of this programme. With that in mind, I'd like to note the recommendation and vote that we approve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seconder? Thank you. Yeah. Those in favour, I would hope is everyone. Thank you very much, and thank you, Rob. I think this is a fantastic piece of work. In order to leverage this amount of money out of the legacy puts a phenomenal amount of added value to those legacies anyway. We'll look forward to the progress, Rob.
I think it's worth a clap.
I think it really is, actually. I think this is a point when we realise, actually, the phenomenal value of the staff resource we have here at the Exmoor National Park, and not to underestimate what can be achieved. So, to move on, anyway, item 8, personnel update. We have 2 leavers to note. Rebecca Jackson as Centre Manager at Lynmouth, and Thomas Bird, a Field Services Estates Worker. And just to note, thanks for the time that they've spent with us as well. Andrea.
Can I just say, Rebecca will be greatly missed. You know, she's quite a character, well known locally.
Yeah.
She'll be a great loss.
I think again, it's recognising those people that contribute so much to what we do here, and sometimes not always that visibly and loudly. It's the people in the background that deliver so much. Just to note as well, as we move on to item 9, is that we do have a public speaker by the look of it for the planning later on, which I didn't note a bit earlier on. And before we move to any other business of urgency, before I close the authority part of the meeting anyway, this is my last authority meeting as chair with you, and I'd like to thank you all very much for having the confidence to elect me for as long as you have, and indulging my sometimes chaotic chairing of some of these meetings. But I wish the new chair all the best in the future. So at that point, being no other business of urgency, I will close the authority meeting, and we will reopen at 1:30 with the planning meeting under Stephen's able chairmanship, and we will break for lunch.